The courthouse in Westridge stood like an old guardian at the center of town, its stone steps worn smooth by decades of footsteps. Among those who climbed those steps each morning was May Lee, though most people in town simply called her Lee. She wasn't the kind of lawyer you'd notice right away. She didn't wear flashy suits or raise her voice to be heard. She didn't need to. Lee had a way of moving through the world that was almost invisible, head slightly down, steps quick and purposeful, always carrying a weathered leather briefcase that had belonged to her father. That briefcase held more than just papers. It held the hopes of people who couldn't afford fancy lawyers but still deserved justice. "Morning, Lee," called the security guard as she passed through the metal detector. "Got another busy one today?" Lee smiled and nodded. "Always busy, Joe. How's your daughter doing in college?" The guard's face lit up. "Made the dean's list again. First one in our family to go to college, and she's knocking it out of the park." This was Lee's gift. She remembered the small details about people that others forgot. While she spoke softly and didn't command attention when she entered a room, she listened in a way that made people feel truly heard. Lee had grown up in Westridge, left for law school at a top university, where she graduated first in her class and then surprised everyone by coming back. She could have taken a job at any big city firm, but she chose to become a public defender in her hometown instead. "I want to help people who need it most," she had told her disappointed professors. The public defender's office was tucked away in the courthouse basement, a maze of small offices with fluorescent lights that buzzed overhead and filing cabinets lining every wall. Lee's desk was the neatest, with case files stacked in perfect order and a small jade plant that somehow thrived, despite the lack of natural light. "Hey, Lee," called her office manager Diane, waving a new file. "You've got the Thompson case. Arraignment is tomorrow morning, Judge Blackwell's courtroom." Lee's hand paused over her coffee cup. "Blackwell? I thought he was handling felonies this month." "He is. This got moved to his docket yesterday. Special request, apparently." That was unusual. Lee took the file and flipped it open. The defendant was Ray Thompson, a 23-year-old handyman charged with trespassing and property damage. As she read deeper, something didn't add up. The property in question was Thompson's family home, a small house on 2 acres of land at the edge of town. Why is he charged with trespassing on his own family's property? Lee wondered aloud. Diane leaned against the doorframe. "That's the thing. The city says that land was condemned 3 weeks ago, but Thompson's family says they never received any notice. They've lived there for 4 generations." Lee pulled up the county property records on her computer. The land had been marked for a new development, luxury condos according to the permit applications. The developer was Westridge Heights LLC. "Westridge Heights," Lee whispered. She'd seen that name before. Connected to several cases where families mysteriously lost their properties just before big development projects broke ground. She dug deeper and found the connection she suspected. Westridge Heights was owned by Gregory Shaw, the biggest developer in the county and, not coincidentally, the biggest donor to Judge Harold Blackwell's re-election campaigns. The more Lee read, the more her stomach tightened. This wasn't just about trespassing. This was about a family about to lose everything they had to make way for expensive condos. If Ray Thompson was convicted, it would strengthen the city's claim that the condemnation was legitimate. "I need to talk to him right away," Lee told Diane. "Can we arrange a meeting this afternoon?" 3 hours later, Lee sat across from Ray Thompson in a small interview room. He was younger than she expected, with calloused hands and tired eyes. His work boots were caked with dried mud, and he kept rubbing his thumb against a worn spot on his jeans. "I didn't do anything wrong," he said, before Lee even asked a question. "That's my grandpa's house. Been in our family since my great-grandpa built it. We never got any papers saying we had to leave." "When did you find out about the condemnation?" Lee asked, taking careful notes. "When I came home from my shift and found new locks on the doors." Ray's voice cracked slightly. "My grandpa's on oxygen. His medicine was inside. That's when I broke the window to get in. Then the police came." Lee nodded, writing everything down. "Where's your grandfather now?" "Neighbor took him in. He's not doing good, though. Stress is making his breathing worse." Lee felt a familiar fire building inside her, the quiet determination that had carried her through law school and every tough case since. "I'm going to help you, Ray, but first, I need to know everything, every piece of mail you received." Every conversation with city officials, everything. For the next hour, she listened and took notes, building a timeline. The pieces didn't fit together in a legal way. There were missing notices, skipped hearings, overlooked appeals periods. Either the city had made a series of incredible mistakes, or someone was cutting corners to fast-track this development. Back in her office, Lee stayed late into the evening. She pulled property records, campaign finance reports, and previous cases involving Westridge Heights. A pattern emerged. Judge Blackwell had presided over 6 cases in the past 2 years involving properties that eventually ended up in Gregory Shaw's portfolio. In all 6 cases, Blackwell had ruled in ways that benefited the developer. Lee printed everything and organized it meticulously in her case file. As the office emptied and the cleaning crew came through, she remained at her desk, preparing her arguments for the morning arraignment. This wasn't going to be a simple plea hearing. She intended to challenge the entire basis of the charges. When Lee finally left the courthouse, the night guard gave her a concerned look. "Working late again, counselor? You should get some rest." "Soon," she promised with a small smile. But first, she drove to the Thompson property. She needed to see it for herself. The house stood dark against the night sky, a modest 2-bedroom ranch with a detached garage and a large oak tree in the front yard. Yellow condemnation notices were taped to the door and windows. In the moonlight, Lee could see the broken window that had led to Ray's arrest, now covered with a piece of plywood. A light came on in the house next door, and an elderly woman stepped onto her porch. "You with the developer?" she called out suspiciously. "No, ma'am. I'm Ray Thompson's lawyer." The woman relaxed. "Thank goodness. Someone needs to help that family. What they're doing isn't right." She introduced herself as Mrs. Patel and invited Lee in for tea. Over the next hour, Mrs. Patel filled in crucial gaps. She had lived next door for 30 years and had witnessed strange visitors in expensive cars taking photos of the Thompson house. Then 2 men in suits came with papers. They tried to get Mr. Thompson to sign, offering money. When he refused, they said he'd regret it. Lee recorded everything, asking careful questions about dates and descriptions. Before leaving, she asked, "Would you be willing to testify if needed?" Mrs. Patel straightened her small frame. "Absolutely. The Thompsons are good people. This land grab isn't right." That night, Lee barely slept. She reviewed her notes and prepared her strategy. Judge Blackwell was known for his sharp tongue and impatience with public defenders. He particularly seemed to enjoy cutting down female attorneys, making comments about their appearance or questioning their understanding of the law. Lee had seen it happen to others but had so far avoided his courtroom. Tomorrow would be different. Judge Blackwell would see her as an easy target, a quiet woman he could bully and dismiss. He wouldn't expect her to fight back. He certainly wouldn't expect her to know about his connections to Gregory Shaw. Lee laid out her clothes for the morning, a simple navy suit, nothing flashy. She wouldn't try to impress with her appearance or her volume. She would impress with her preparation and her knowledge of the law. As dawn broke over Westridge, Lee was already awake, reviewing her notes one final time. Today would be just the beginning of a much bigger fight. She knew that taking on Judge Blackwell and the powerful interests he protected could harm her career or worse. But when she thought of Ray Thompson and his grandfather, of Mrs. Patel and all the others who might lose their homes if this corruption continued, she knew she had no choice. Lee closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Her mother had always told her that true strength wasn't about being the loudest person in the room. It was about standing firm when it mattered most. Today, Lee would stand firm. With quiet determination, she picked up her father's leather briefcase and headed to the courthouse. The morning sun cast long shadows as she climbed those worn stone steps. Just another day to most people passing by. But Lee knew that by the end of today, nothing would be the same. The Westridge County Courthouse was already bustling when Lee arrived the next morning. She nodded to the security guards and made her way to courtroom 3, where Judge Harold Blackwell presided. Even from the hallway, she could hear his booming voice berating someone, probably a defendant who couldn't afford bail or an attorney who wasn't prepared to his liking. Lee straightened her simple navy suit and took a deep breath before pushing through the heavy wooden doors. The courtroom fell silent for a moment as she entered. Judge Blackwell sat high on his bench, his silver hair perfectly combed, his black robe pressed and imposing. He glanced at Lee with barely concealed disdain before returning to the case file in front of him. "Ah, the Thompson case," he announced as Lee approached the defense table where Ray waited in his best clothes. Clean jeans and a button-up shirt that seemed a size too large. "Let's make this quick. I have important matters on my docket today." Lee set her briefcase on the table. "Good morning, Your Honor. May Lee for the defense." Judge Blackwell looked up, his eyes narrowing. "Ms. Lee, I don't see you in my courtroom often." "No, Your Honor, I'm usually in Judge Rivera's court." "Well, this isn't Rivera's playpen. I run a tight ship here." He turned to the prosecutor, a young man in an expensive suit. "Mr. Parker, the charges?" The prosecutor stood. "Thomas Ray Thompson, charged with criminal trespassing and destruction of property." "Your Honor, the defendant broke into a condemned property after being served with proper notice to vacate." Lee spoke up immediately. "Your Honor, we challenge the premise of these charges. Mr. Thompson was never properly served with condemnation papers. He was entering his family's home of 4 generations to retrieve essential medication for his grandfather." Judge Blackwell sighed dramatically. "Ms. Lee, are you new to criminal procedure? This is an arraignment, not a trial. Save your speeches." "I'm well aware of what an arraignment is, Your Honor," Lee replied calmly. "But these charges are fundamentally flawed. I've prepared a motion to dismiss based on improper condemnation proceedings." She pulled out a document and approached the bench. Judge Blackwell barely glanced at it. "Motion denied," he said before she could even return to her table. "How does your client plead?" Lee maintained her composure. "Before entering a plea, I'd like to request discovery regarding the condemnation process, particularly the notice requirements under State Code Section 4218. The judge's face flushed slightly. "Ms. Lee, perhaps you need a refresher on courtroom procedure. I asked for a plea, not a fishing expedition." From the gallery, Lee could feel eyes on her. Other attorneys, court staff, and a few reporters who always hung around for Blackwell's morning docket. They were watching to see if she would back down. "My client pleads not guilty, Your Honor," she said, "and we request all discovery materials be provided within 5 days as required by law." Judge Blackwell's mouth tightened. "Trial is set for 3 weeks from today. Ms. Lee, I suggest you use that time to familiarize yourself with how things work in my courtroom." As Lee began to speak again, the judge cut her off. "And might I suggest a more appropriate attire next time? This is a court of law, not a shopping mall." Lee's simple but professional suit was perfectly appropriate, and everyone in the courtroom knew it. A few attorneys exchanged glances. The court reporter paused, her fingers hovering over her machine. "My attire complies with court dress code, Your Honor," Lee replied evenly. "Now, regarding bail is set at $50,000, the judge interrupted. Lee's eyes widened. "Your Honor, that's excessive for a first-time offender charged with a non-violent property crime. Mr. Thompson has strong community ties and is his grandfather's caretaker." "Should have thought of that before." "Breaking and entering," Judge Blackwell replied dismissively. Next case, Lee stood her ground. "Your Honor, I'd like the record to reflect my objection to this excessive bail amount, which appears to violate the 8th Amendment's prohibition against Ms. Lee." Blackwell's voice thundered through the courtroom. "You're testing my patience. One more word and I'll hold you in contempt." The courtroom fell silent. Lee looked at Ray, whose face had gone pale. She nodded slightly to reassure him, then gathered her papers. "Very well, Your Honor. We'll appeal the bail determination immediately." As Lee left the courtroom, she noticed a well-dressed man watching from the back row. She recognized him from newspaper photos. Gregory Shaw, the developer. He was smiling. Back in her office, Lee didn't allow herself to show the anger she felt. Instead, she meticulously wrote down everything that had happened in Judge Blackwell's courtroom, noting his exact words and demeanor. Then she called her old law school professor who specialized in judicial ethics. "It's good to hear from you, Lee," Professor Chen said warmly. "What's going on?" Lee explained the situation, the suspicious condemnation, the connection between the judge and developer, and the treatment she'd received in court. "Classic Blackwell." Professor Chen sighed. "He's been rumored to have improper connections for years, but no one's been able to prove anything. He's careful." "I need to get Ray out on bail first," Lee said. "His grandfather needs him. File for an emergency review with Judge Rivera. She's fair, and she doesn't like Blackwell much either." Lee spent the rest of the day preparing the bail appeal and a formal discovery request. She worked through lunch, ignoring the ache in her shoulders from tension. As afternoon faded into evening, Diane stopped by her office. "You went up against Blackwell today?" she asked, leaning against the doorframe. Words getting around. Lee looked up from her computer. "Did they mention how he set bail at $50,000 for a trespassing charge?" "They did. Also mentioned you didn't back down." Diane placed a sandwich on Lee's desk. "Eat something. You can't fight corruption on an empty stomach." After filing the emergency bail review, Lee drove to the county records office. She needed to see the actual condemnation paperwork for the Thompson property. The clerk, an older woman named Betty, who had worked there for decades, helped her search through the files. "That's odd," Betty said, frowning at her computer. "The Thompson property file was checked out yesterday by Judge Blackwell's clerk. Can you see when it was condemned?" Lee asked. Betty typed a few commands. "Says here the order was signed 3 weeks ago, but..." She squinted at the screen. "It wasn't entered into the system until last week." "That's not right," Lee wrote down the dates. "Is there a digital copy?" "Should be, but it's marked as processing. Never seen that before." On her way out, Lee nearly collided with a man in an expensive suit. "Excuse me," she said, stepping aside. The man blocked her path. "Ms. Lee, isn't it?" "I'm Gregory Shaw." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "I understand you're representing Ray Thompson." Lee maintained her professional demeanor. "I don't discuss my cases, Mr. Shaw. I just wanted to let you know there's an easier way to resolve this." He pulled a business card from his pocket. "My company is prepared to offer the Thompsons a fair payment for their property. Much more generous than the condemnation value. Any offer should go through proper channels, Mr. Shaw. Now, if you'll excuse me." Shaw's smile faded. "Judge Blackwell speaks highly of your legal abilities, but mentions you sometimes lack practical judgment. It would be a shame to see a promising career derailed over one small case." The threat was thinly veiled. Lee met his gaze steadily. "Threatening an officer of the court is unwise, Mr. Shaw. Good evening." The next morning, Judge Rivera granted the emergency bail review. She reduced Ray's bail to $5,000, still high but manageable. Ray's co-workers pooled their money to post it, and by afternoon he was released. "Thank you," he told Lee as they left the courthouse. "My grandpa's doing better now that I'm home." "We're just getting started," Lee replied. "The prosecutor's office should provide discovery materials soon. Then we'll see what they really have." But 3 days passed with no discovery forthcoming. Lee filed a motion to compel, and Judge Blackwell scheduled a hearing. This time the courtroom was packed. Word had spread about the young public defender standing up to the notoriously difficult judge. "Ms. Lee," Judge Blackwell began, his tone condescending, "your motion suggests the prosecution is withholding evidence. That's a serious accusation." "The prosecution has failed to provide discovery within the statutory time frame," Lee replied. "We can't prepare a defense without seeing the evidence against my client." The prosecutor stood. "Your Honor, we're still gathering the relevant documents. The city planning office has been slow to respond." "See?" Blackwell gestured broadly. "A reasonable explanation." Motion denied, Lee persisted. "Your Honor, the law doesn't allow for delays based on convenience. If the prosecution doesn't have their evidence organized, perhaps the charges should be dismissed until they do." Blackwell leaned forward, his expression darkening. "Ms. Lee, you seem determined to test the limits of my patience. Let me be clear, I run this courtroom, not you. Your little stunts might impress your fellow public defenders, but they won't work here." Lee noticed the court reporter's fingers flying over her machine, recording every word. "Good. This isn't a stunt." "Your Honor, it's due process," Lee replied calmly. "My client has the right to examine the evidence against him. Your client broke into a condemned property. The evidence is straightforward. Then it should be simple to provide it," Lee countered. The courtroom held its breath. Judge Blackwell's face flushed red. "You have 48 hours to provide discovery," he finally told the prosecutor. "And Ms. Lee, I'm ordering you to attend a refresher course on courtroom etiquette. Your demeanor is inappropriate." As Lee gathered her papers, she noticed Gregory Shaw again, sitting in the back of the courtroom with a scowl on his face. Their eyes met briefly before he looked away. Outside the courthouse, a local reporter approached her. "Ms. Lee, you've gone head-to-head with Judge Blackwell twice now. Some attorneys go their whole careers avoiding his courtroom. Why take him on?" Lee thought carefully before answering. "This isn't about Judge Blackwell or me. It's about making sure everyone gets fair treatment under the law, especially those who can't afford expensive lawyers. What Lee didn't say was that she was documenting every interaction, building a case that went far beyond Ray Thompson's trespassing charge. Each time Blackwell showed his bias, each procedural corner cut, each unusual ruling, they all formed pieces of a puzzle she was slowly assembling. That night, as Lee reviewed old case files involving properties now owned by Westridge Heights, her phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number. "Ms. Lee," a muffled voice said, "you should check the building permits for the Thompson property. Look at who signed off on the expedited review." "Who is this?" Lee asked, but the caller had already hung up. She set down her phone, a chill running through her. She was getting closer to something important, something people wanted to stay hidden, and Judge Blackwell's treatment of her in court would only get worse before it got better. The city planning office was housed in a dull gray building 2 blocks from the courthouse. Lee arrived just as they opened, clipboard in hand and determination in her step. Following the mysterious caller's tip, she needed to see those building permits. "I'm here to review permits for 1423 Maple Street," she told the clerk, a young man with tired eyes and a crooked tie. "That address sounds familiar," he mumbled, typing it into his computer. "Oh, that's the Thompson place, part of the Westridge Heights expansion." Lee kept her expression neutral. "I just need to review the paperwork. You'll have to talk to Nancy. She handles all the special projects." Nancy turned out to be a middle-aged woman with streaks of gray in her dark hair and reading glasses hanging from a beaded chain. She frowned when Lee mentioned the address. "Those files are restricted," she said without looking up from her computer. "I'm the attorney representing the property owner," Lee explained, sliding her business card across the desk. "I have a right to access those documents." Nancy's fingers stopped typing. She glanced around before lowering her voice. "Look, I'm not supposed to say anything, but that file came down from the mayor's office with special instructions. Everything was rushed through." "Rushed how?" Nancy hesitated, then sighed. "Normal condemnation takes months. Public notices, hearings, appeals processes. This one went through in 2 weeks. I've worked here 20 years and I've never seen anything like it." Lee leaned forward. "I need to see those documents, Nancy. They're not here anymore. Director Peterson took them to a meeting at Westridge Heights last week." Nancy scribbled something on a sticky note and slid it across the desk. "But I made copies. I didn't feel right about it." The note had an address, Nancy's home address. Lee understood immediately and nodded her thanks. That evening, Lee knocked on Nancy's door. The woman looked nervous but invited her in. "I shouldn't be doing this," Nancy said as she handed Lee a thick folder. "But my brother lost his house in a similar deal 5 years ago. The system's supposed to protect regular people, not push them out for fancy condos." Lee spent hours reviewing the documents. What she found confirmed her suspicions and more. The condemnation process had bypassed nearly every required step. There was no structural assessment proving the property was unsafe. No public hearing had been held. Most damning of all, the expedited approval had been signed by Judge Blackwell himself. A clear ethical violation, since judges weren't supposed to involve themselves in administrative matters that might come before their court. At the bottom of the stack, Lee found something unexpected. Emails between Gregory Shaw and Mayor Wilson discussing making sure Blackwell handles the Thompson case. One email mentioned the usual arrangement and referenced an offshore account. Lee's hands trembled slightly as she photographed each document with her phone. This went beyond one corrupt judge. It was systematic. The next morning, Lee filed a motion requesting Judge Blackwell recuse himself due to conflict of interest. She carefully worded it to mention only the judge's signature on the expedited review. Nothing about the emails or larger conspiracy. She needed to play this carefully. As expected, Blackwell scheduled an immediate hearing. The courtroom was unusually full. Word had spread about the public defender challenging the powerful judge. "Ms. Lee," Judge Blackwell began, his voice dripping with condescension, "your motion is not just denied. It's borderline sanctionable. You've provided no substantive evidence of any conflict." Lee stood calmly at the defense table. "Your Honor, with respect, your signature appears on the expedited condemnation review for my client's property. That creates at minimum the appearance of bias." Blackwell's face darkened. "And how exactly did you obtain these alleged documents?" "They weren't included in your motion. I've submitted a formal records request, Your Honor. The planning office is gathering them now." It was a careful deflection. Lee hadn't revealed her meeting with Nancy, protecting the whistleblower while still establishing the documents existed. Judge Blackwell leaned forward. Ms. Lee, let me explain something you apparently didn't learn in law school. Administrative reviews and judicial proceedings are separate matters. My involvement in one does not preclude my objectivity in the other. The State Judicial Ethics Code, Section 8.4, specifically states that judges shall not participate in matters where they have played an administrative role. Lee countered, I can provide the full text if the court needs a refresher. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Blackwell's face flushed red. No one spoke to him this way, especially not in his own courtroom. Ms. Lee, you're in contempt, he thundered, banging his gavel. $500 due by end of business today. Lee had anticipated this. I accept the court's ruling and will pay the fine. For the record, I maintain that Your Honor's involvement in the condemnation process creates a direct conflict under state law. The prosecutor, looking increasingly uncomfortable with the case, rose to speak. Your Honor, given the defense's concerns, perhaps another judge should— Mr. Parker, you're here to prosecute. Not make procedural suggestions, Blackwell snapped. From the gallery, Lee noticed Gregory Shaw watching with narrowed eyes. Beside him sat Mayor Wilson, looking distinctly uncomfortable. Judge Blackwell turned back to Lee. Now, Ms. Lee, unless you have actual legal matters to discuss, this hearing is over. Trial begins Monday, and I expect better preparation than these baseless motions. I have one more motion, Your Honor, Lee said, pulling another document from her folder. Motion to dismiss based on improper condemnation procedures. Another fishing expedition? Blackwell sighed dramatically. No, Your Honor. This motion includes the condemnation timeline showing statutory violations, statements from neighboring property owners confirming no public notice was posted, and county records indicating no structural inspection was ever performed. As she spoke, Lee approached the bench and handed the thick motion to the clerk. She had spent all night preparing it, knowing Blackwell would likely deny it, but also knowing every word was being recorded in the official transcript. Judge Blackwell barely glanced at the document. Motion denied. Anything else, Ms. Lee, or can we conclude this waste of the court's time? Lee paused, then spoke clearly for the record. Your Honor, I'd like to note that this is the third substantive motion denied without review of supporting evidence. The defense reserves the right to raise these issues on appeal. Duly noted, Blackwell said dismissively. See you Monday. As the courtroom cleared, Lee felt a hand on her shoulder. It was Betty from the county records office. You're making powerful enemies, Betty whispered, but you're asking the right questions. Check the property transfers from last year. 6 other properties on that same street. Lee nodded thanks and headed back to her office. The web of corruption was wider than she'd first thought. This wasn't just about Ray Thompson's home. It was about a systematic seizure of properties for private development, facilitated by a corrupt judge. That afternoon, Ray stopped by her office, worry etched on his face. The developer's people came by again. Offered my grandpa twice what the house is worth if we drop the case. What did he say? Lee asked. Ray's expression softened with pride. Grandpa told them his father built that house with his own hands and no amount of money could replace it. Then he showed them his old shotgun and suggested they leave. Lee couldn't help but smile. Tell your grandfather to accept any legal offers in writing. Don't sign anything, just collect evidence. After Ray left, Lee worked late into the evening preparing for Monday's trial. She knew Blackwell would try to rush through the proceedings, ruling against her at every turn. She needed to be ready with perfect citations, flawless arguments, and unimpeachable evidence. Just before midnight, her phone rang. Professor Chen returning her earlier call. I looked into what you sent, he said, his voice grave. This goes beyond judicial misconduct, Lee. This looks like criminal conspiracy. If what you found is accurate, Blackwell could face federal charges. What should I do? Lee asked, rubbing her tired eyes. You need to be extremely careful. Judges like Blackwell don't go down easily, and they don't fight fair. He paused. I have a contact at the State Ethics Commission. With your permission, I'd like to share what you found so far. Lee agreed, then asked the question that had been bothering her. Why hasn't anyone stopped him before now? Fear, Professor Chen said simply. Fear of retaliation, fear of losing careers. Blackwell has powerful friends and a long memory. He's ruined attorneys who crossed him. After they hung up, Lee sat in her dark office, the weight of what she was doing settling over her. She wasn't just fighting for Ray Thompson anymore. She was challenging a corrupt system that had operated unchecked for years. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Parking garage across from courthouse. Level P3 tomorrow, 7 a.m. Lee hesitated. It could be a trap, but it could also be another whistleblower. After a moment's thought, she texted Diane. If I don't check in by 7:30 tomorrow morning, call Professor Chen. Tell him to open the envelope in my desk drawer. The envelope contained copies of everything she'd discovered so far, including the planning office documents and her notes connecting the various cases. The next morning, Lee arrived at the parking garage early, parking her car on level P2 and taking the stairs down. Level P3 was nearly empty at this hour, just a few cars scattered throughout the dim space. A figure stood in the shadows near a concrete pillar. As Lee approached cautiously, the person stepped forward, and she recognized the face. It was Parker, the prosecutor assigned to Ray's case. I didn't know who else to talk to, he said, his voice low and strained. They're watching me. Blackwell has friends everywhere. What's going on? Lee asked. Parker glanced around nervously. I tried to recuse myself from the case yesterday. This morning I was called into a meeting with the DA. He showed me a file, things from my past that no one is supposed to know. They're blackmailing you to continue the prosecution. Lee realized. Parker nodded miserably. This isn't the first time. There's a pattern. Certain cases get assigned to certain prosecutors, then to Blackwell. It's all fixed. He handed her a USB drive. Court assignments for the past 3 years. Every case involving Westridge Heights or their subsidiaries went to Blackwell. Every single one. Lee took the drive, understanding the risk he was taking. This could cost you your job. It already has, Parker said with a bitter smile. I resigned this morning. I just couldn't do it anymore. He started to walk away, then turned back. Be careful in court on Monday. Blackwell knows you're not backing down and he's scared. That makes him dangerous. Lee watched him go, the USB drive heavy in her pocket. Monday's trial would be more than a legal proceeding. It would be a battle against a system designed to crush anyone who challenged it. But for the first time since taking Ray's case, Lee felt a spark of hope. People were speaking up. The truth was coming to light. And on Monday, Judge Blackwell would discover that the quiet woman he'd tried to embarrass was more formidable than anyone had realized. Monday morning arrived with dark clouds hanging over Westridge. The courthouse steps were unusually crowded. Word had spread about the showdown between the quiet public defender and the powerful judge. Lee noticed several reporters and even a sketch artist from the local paper. She found Ray waiting by the courtroom doors, dressed in his Sunday best, his hands fidgeting nervously. How's your grandfather? She asked. Not good, Ray admitted. The stress is making his breathing worse. Doctor says he might need hospital care if things don't improve. Lee squeezed his arm reassuringly. Stay strong. Today's going to be hard, but I'm prepared. Inside the courtroom, every seat was taken. Lee spotted Gregory Shaw sitting in the front row, whispering to Mayor Wilson. Betty from Records was there, along with Nancy from Planning. Even Diane had taken the morning off to show support. Judge Blackwell swept in, his black robe billowing behind him. He seemed surprised by the packed room, but quickly composed himself, banging his gavel with unnecessary force. Court is now in session. The state versus Thomas Ray Thompson. He glanced at Lee with thinly veiled contempt. Are the parties ready to proceed? A new prosecutor stood. Andrew Morris for the state, Your Honor. We're ready. May Lee for the defense. We're ready, Your Honor. Judge Blackwell raised an eyebrow. Mr. Morris? Where is Mr. Parker? Reassigned, Your Honor. I was brought in this morning. Lee noted how the new prosecutor avoided eye contact with anyone. A last-minute replacement. Likely someone more willing to play along with the corrupt scheme than Parker had been. Very well, Blackwell said. Opening statements. Mr. Morris? The prosecutor's opening was brief and straightforward. Ray had broken into a legally condemned property. End of story. He made no mention of the questionable condemnation process or the missing notices. When it was Lee's turn, she approached the jury box calmly, her notes held loosely in one hand. This case is simple, but not for the reasons the prosecution claims, she began, her quiet voice somehow commanding attention. My client, Ray Thompson, did break a window to enter his family's home. A home they've owned for 4 generations. A home they were never legally notified was condemned. A home that contains his grandfather's life-saving medication. Lee paused, looking each juror in the eye. But this case isn't really about a broken window. It's about something much more valuable. Land. Valuable land that certain powerful people want, and the lengths they'll go to take it from a family that refuses to sell. Objection. Morris jumped to his feet. Counsel is making unsupported allegations. Sustained, Judge Blackwell snapped. Ms. Lee, stick to the facts of the case. Lee nodded respectfully. The evidence will show that the Thompson property was never properly condemned. No structural inspection was performed. No public notice was posted. No hearing was held. Every legal protection was bypassed to push this family off their land. That's not justice, it's theft wearing a legal disguise. As she returned to her seat, she noticed Gregory Shaw scowling. Good. The prosecutor's first witness was the arresting officer, a young policeman who testified about finding Ray inside the property and arresting him for trespassing. During cross-examination, Lee was methodical. Officer Chen, did you personally see any condemnation notices posted on the property before the arrest? No, ma'am. Were you aware the defendant lived at that address? Yes, dispatch informed me it was his family home. Did the defendant explain why he broke the window? The officer shifted uncomfortably. He said his grandfather needed medicine that was inside. Did you verify this? No. We were told to secure the property immediately. Told by whom? Objection. Morris interrupted. Irrelevant. Sustained, Judge Blackwell said. Move along, Ms. Lee. Lee changed direction smoothly. Officer Chen, in your report, you mentioned receiving special instructions regarding this address. What were those instructions? The officer hesitated, glancing at Judge Blackwell. We were told to treat any entry as criminal trespassing, even by residents. That's unusual for a condemned property. Normally, we'd just escort them out, maybe issue a citation. Who gave those special instructions? The chief said it came from the mayor's office. Lee noticed Mayor Wilson shifting uncomfortably in his seat. The prosecution's next witness was the city inspector, who had supposedly found the property unsafe. Under Lee's questioning, he admitted he'd never actually visited the Thompson house. So you condemned a property you never inspected? Lee asked incredulously. I was told it was an emergency situation that needed immediate action, the inspector explained. Told by whom? The mayor's office. They sent over the paperwork already filled out. I just signed it. Each witness added another piece to the puzzle Lee was assembling for the jury. A picture of corruption and abuse of power. Judge Blackwell grew increasingly agitated, sustaining nearly every objection from the prosecutor and interrupting Lee's questions. After the lunch recess, Lee called her first witness, Nancy from the planning office. Ms. Patel, please explain the normal condemnation process to the jury. Lee began. Nancy detailed the multiple steps required, inspections, notices, hearings, appeals, and then explained how the Thompson property had bypassed everyone. In your 20 years at the planning office, have you ever seen a residential condemnation processed this quickly? Never, Nancy stated firmly. It usually takes months, not days. Who authorized this expedited process? Nancy took a deep breath. The paperwork was signed by Judge Blackwell. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Judge Blackwell banged his gavel furiously. That's a lie, he shouted, momentarily forgetting his role as an impartial arbiter. I never signed any such document. Lee calmly walked to the evidence table and picked up an exhibit. Your Honor, this is the expedited condemnation form from the city planning office marked as Defense Exhibit C. Would you like to examine your signature? The courtroom fell silent. Blackwell stared at Lee, his face contorted with rage and disbelief. He had walked right into her trap, abandoning judicial impartiality to defend himself. Lee continued as if nothing unusual had happened. Ms. Patel, who typically has authority to expedite condemnations, only the city council after a public hearing. Lee turned to face Judge Blackwell directly. Your Honor, given that you've just disputed evidence related to your own actions, I believe we have a serious judicial conflict. I renew my motion for your recusal. Blackwell's knuckles turned white as he gripped his gavel. Motion denied. This witness is excused. We'll take a 15-minute recess. As the judge stormed out, the courtroom erupted in whispers. Lee noticed a woman in a crisp suit entering from the back, someone she didn't recognize. During the recess, the mystery woman approached Lee. "Andrea Wong, State Judicial Ethics Commission," she said quietly, offering her card. "We received some concerning information about this case. I need to speak with you and Judge Blackwell immediately." When court resumed, Ms. Wong was seated in the front row. Judge Blackwell returned looking ashen but composed. "Before we continue," he announced, "I've determined that I should recuse myself from this case due to a potential appearance of conflict. Judge Rivera will take over tomorrow morning." Lee kept her expression neutral, but inside she felt a surge of triumph. Blackwell was retreating, trying to salvage what he could. "Your Honor," Lee said, "given these developments, I move for immediate dismissal of all charges against my client." Blackwell's jaw tightened. "That will be for Judge Rivera to decide. Court is adjourned until tomorrow at 9 a.m. As people filed out, Gregory Shaw stormed up to Blackwell, their heated whispers carrying through the nearly empty courtroom. "You promised this would be handled. Do you have any idea what's at stake?" The judge hissed back. "Keep your voice down. This isn't over. We just need to regroup." Lee pretended not to hear as she gathered her papers. The woman from the Ethics Commission approached again. "Ms. Lee, I'd like you to walk me through everything you found. My office received an anonymous package with some disturbing documentation about Judge Blackwell's property dealings." "Of course," Lee replied. "But first I need to file a motion with Judge Rivera for my client's case dismissal." As they left the courtroom, Ray caught up with them, his eyes wide with hope. "Is it true?" The judge stepped down. "Yes, but we're not done yet," Lee cautioned. "Blackwell is just one part of a bigger problem." That evening, Lee's phone rang constantly. Reporters wanted statements. Other clients with similar property issues called for help. Professor Chen called to congratulate her on the recusal. "This is just the beginning," he warned. "Blackwell has powerful allies. They'll try to contain the damage." Lee was working late in her office when a knock came at her door. It was Diane. "You need to see this," she said, placing a tablet on Lee's desk. It showed the local news website with the headline, "Judge recuses himself amid corruption allegations. Ethics investigation launched." "It's going public," Lee said softly. Diane nodded. "And there's more. 2 other families have come forward with similar stories about their properties. The reporter wants to talk to you." Lee considered this carefully. Until now, she'd been fighting in the courtroom, following legal procedures. Going to the media would escalate everything. Tell them I'll provide a statement tomorrow, after Ray's case is resolved. After Diane left, Lee sat alone in her office, thinking about how quickly everything was unfolding. She'd started this fight to help one client, but it had grown into something much larger. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Parking lot now, you're in danger." Lee hesitated, then grabbed her keys. In the dim parking lot behind the public defender's office, she found Parker, the original prosecutor, looking haggard and frightened. "They know you have the documents," he said without preamble. "Shaw's people were at my apartment. They tore the place apart looking for copies. Are you okay?" Lee asked, alarmed. "I'm leaving town tonight, but I wanted to warn you, they're desperate. The Thompson property isn't just valuable land. There's something else going on. Something bigger." "What do you mean?" Parker glanced nervously over his shoulder. "I overheard Shaw talking about what's underneath being worth millions. Whatever it is, it's worth committing crimes for." As he hurried away, Lee stood in the dark parking lot, piecing together this new information. The corruption went deeper than she'd thought, and tomorrow's hearing before Judge Rivera would be just another battle in a much longer war. But for the first time, she wasn't fighting alone. The truth was emerging, and others were finding the courage to speak up. Judge Blackwell had tried to embarrass and intimidate her, never expecting that the quiet woman he underestimated would be the one to expose his corruption. Lee got into her car, her mind already planning tomorrow's arguments. The real showdown was yet to come. The following morning, Judge Rivera's courtroom had a completely different atmosphere. News vans lined the street outside the courthouse. Every seat was filled, with people standing along the back wall. Lee spotted several attorneys from other firms who had never shown interest in a public defender's case before. Judge Rivera, a no-nonsense woman with silver-streaked hair and sharp eyes, called the court to order precisely at 9 a.m. "I've reviewed the case file overnight," she began, "including the motions and evidence submitted by Ms. Lee. Before we proceed, I have several concerns about the handling of this case. Lee felt Ray tense beside her. She gave his arm a reassuring pat. First, Judge Rivera continued, the condemnation process for the Thompson property shows significant irregularities. Second, the involvement of Judge Blackwell in both the administrative and judicial proceedings represents a clear conflict of interest. The prosecutor, Morris, shifted uncomfortably. Your Honor, the state would like to request a continuance to review. Denied, Judge Rivera said firmly. This matter has been delayed enough. Ms. Lee, I believe you have a motion before this court. Lee stood. Yes, Your Honor. The defense moves for immediate dismissal of all charges against Ray Thompson based on improper condemnation proceedings and violation of due process. Any objection, Mr. Morris? The prosecutor looked torn, glancing toward the gallery where Gregory Shaw sat scowling. The state acknowledges the procedural issues but believes the underlying case still has merit. Judge Rivera raised an eyebrow. Does the state have any evidence that wasn't gathered as fruit of these improper proceedings? No, Your Honor, Morris admitted reluctantly. Then the motion to dismiss is granted. Mr. Thompson, you are free to go. Judge Rivera banged her gavel. Furthermore, I am referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for investigation into possible misconduct related to the condemnation process. Ray broke into a wide smile, turning to hug Lee. Thank you, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. But Lee knew they weren't finished. As people began filing out, she approached the bench. Your Honor, there's an additional matter regarding the Thompson property. The condemnation order, while improperly obtained, is still technically in effect. My client needs that order vacated to regain legal access to his home. Judge Rivera nodded. File the motion today. I'll review it immediately. As Lee turned to leave, Ms. Wong from the Ethics Commission stopped her. We need to talk. Not here. They arranged to meet at a coffee shop 2 blocks from the courthouse. Ms. Wong was already there when Lee arrived, a thick folder on the table beside her coffee cup. You've uncovered something much bigger than one corrupt judge, she said without preamble. We've been investigating Blackwell for months but couldn't get solid evidence until now. Lee sipped her tea. How widespread is it? At least 3 judges, 2 city council members, and several officials in the planning department. All connected to Westridge Heights developments. Ms. Wong leaned forward. But the governor just authorized a special prosecutor. We're going to clean house. What about the Thompson property? And the others that were improperly condemned? That's actually why I wanted to talk to you. Ms. Wong slid a newspaper across the table. It was folded open to a story about mineral rights. This might explain the rush to acquire that particular piece of land. Lee scanned the article. According to geological surveys, that part of the county sat on a significant deposit of rare earth minerals, elements crucial for electronics manufacturing. The article mentioned a mining company, Highland Resources, that had been quietly buying property in the area. Gregory Shaw is the major investor in Highland Resources, Ms. Wong explained, the company that doesn't exist on paper. The Thompson property is reportedly sitting on one of the richest veins. Lee thought about what Parker had said about what's underneath being worth millions. It all made sense now. The rushed condemnation, the bypass of normal procedures, the pressure to get Ray convicted. It wasn't just about luxury condos. It was about what lay beneath the soil. That afternoon, Lee filed the motion to vacate the condemnation order. Judge Rivera granted it within hours. Ray and his grandfather could return home legally. But Lee didn't stop there. She filed a civil suit against the city, Westridge Heights, and Judge Blackwell personally for violating her client's civil rights. She included every document she'd gathered, every witness statement, every piece of evidence of the corruption. The story exploded across local media, then state, then national. Small-town corruption ring exposed by public defender, read one headline. Quiet attorney brings down corrupt judge, declared another. 3 days after Ray's case was dismissed, federal agents arrived in Westridge. They raided Judge Blackwell's home and office, the mayor's office, and Gregory Shaw's company headquarters. Computers were seized. Files were boxed up. People were led away in handcuffs. Lee watched the news coverage from her small office, still processing how quickly everything had unfolded. Diane knocked on her open door. You have visitors, she announced with a grin. Ray entered, followed by an elderly man using an oxygen tank, his grandfather, Mr. Thompson. Behind them came several other families Lee recognized from her research, all people who had lost properties to Westridge Heights developments. "We wanted to thank you," Ray said, "for fighting when no one else would." Mr. Thompson stepped forward slowly. "My father built our house with these hands," he said, holding up gnarled fingers. "Thanks to you, my grandson won't have to watch strangers tear it down." A woman stepped forward, Mrs. Patel from next door to the Thompsons. "We've talked among ourselves. All of us who were pushed out or threatened. We want to file a class action lawsuit against them all. The developers, the judges, the city. Will you represent us?" Lee looked at the group of people watching her hopefully. These weren't wealthy clients who could pay big legal fees. They were regular people who had been wronged by those with power and money. Exactly the reason she'd become a lawyer in the first place. "Yes," she said simply. "I'd be honored." The next morning, Lee arrived at the courthouse to file the class action paperwork. The security guard, Joe, grinned and gave her a thumbs up as she passed through the metal detector. "Saw you on the news," he said proudly. "My daughter called from college all excited. Said she wants to be a public defender now just like you." Lee smiled, remembering how just weeks ago she had walked through these same doors, nearly invisible to most people. Now attorneys nodded respectfully as she passed. A court clerk asked for her autograph for his law student daughter. As she rounded the corner, she nearly collided with Judge Blackwell, who was leaving the courthouse with his lawyer. His face was ashen, his usually impeccable suit rumpled. His eyes widened in recognition, then narrowed with hatred. Lee met his gaze calmly, neither flinching nor gloating. She simply nodded politely and continued on her way. The federal investigation expanded over the following weeks. More officials were implicated. More families came forward. The special prosecutor uncovered a web of corruption stretching back nearly a decade. Judge Blackwell and Gregory Shaw were indicted on multiple federal charges including bribery, mail fraud, and conspiracy. The preliminary hearing was assigned to Judge Rivera's court. 1 month after Ray's case was dismissed, Lee received a letter from the State Bar Association. They were honoring her with their annual Justice Award for her work exposing corruption. The letter mentioned that several law schools had expressed interest in having her speak to their students about legal ethics. Lee placed the letter on her desk beside a handmade card from Mr. Thompson. Inside, he had written simply, "Some people build houses. Some people build justice. Thank you for rebuilding both for our family." She smiled as she looked around her small office in the Public Defender's building. She could have taken offers from prestigious firms now seeking her attention. She could have leveraged her newfound fame for a more lucrative position. Instead, she picked up a new case file, another person who couldn't afford a fancy lawyer but deserved justice just the same. The quiet woman who had shocked a corrupt judge with her legal brilliance hadn't changed. She still let her work speak for itself, still fought for those who needed a voice, and that, she decided, was victory enough.